Joseph's suffering and glory. 12 sons were born to Jacob, and they became the most senior members of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 11th of these 12 sons was called Joseph. Jacob had a particular love for Joseph, but Joseph's brothers were jealous of him because of the favoritism their father demonstrated towards him. At this time, Joseph had 2 dreams. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Joseph's brothers said sarcastically, "Do you intend to reign over us?" And in the end, they came up with a plan to harm him. They devised a plan and sold him as a slave to some Ishmaelite merchants who were on their way down to Egypt. Then they soaked his robe in the blood of a male goat and took it back to their father, Jacob. Jacob was heartbroken, thinking Joseph must have been killed by some ferocious animal. But there was no one to tell him what had really happened. The Midianite merchants took Joseph down to Egypt, where he was sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Joseph was sold first of all by his brothers, and then the merchants sold him again as a slave. It is important to remember that hidden within this lies an image of the Messiah who would someday be put to death at the hands of his own people and the people of a Gentile nation. Joseph, this young man of outstanding character and wisdom, was always helped by God, and he was elevated to the position of overseer of Potiphar's entire household. He lived in this way, and then one day Potiphar's wife tried to entice him. Full of loyalty, Joseph rejected her advances several times. In the end, unable to have her own way, Potiphar's wife framed him, and he was cast into the prison that housed all those who had committed crimes against the king. He was victimized again and again. He had been sold by his elder brothers, and now, having become caught up in the evil plan of an Egyptian woman, he ended up in a dark underground prison. Even in the prison, Joseph was acknowledged for his ability and wisdom in dealing with everything that was put in his charge. While he was there, 2 officials of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, were locked up in the prison, and Joseph waited on them. One of them was the king's chief cupbearer, and the other his chief baker. One night, each of them had a dream. Joseph interpreted these dreams through the wisdom of God and told the cupbearer he would be restored to his position 3 days later, while the baker would be put to death 3 days later. This is precisely what happened. The cupbearer, however, forgot to tell Pharaoh about what had happened, and 2 more years passed. Then one night, Pharaoh had 2 consecutive dreams. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. Not one of the magicians and wise men of Egypt was able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. It was then that the cupbearer remembered what had happened to him 2 years earlier, and he told Pharaoh about Joseph. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers at the age of 17, and he had spent a long time in the prison in Egypt. When he stood before Pharaoh, he was 30 years old. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream to mean that there would be 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of dire famine, and he suggested that Pharaoh make preparations for this famine. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh made him governor of the entire country, and he even took the signet ring from his own finger and entrusted it to Joseph. Since God was with him and gave him wisdom, Joseph was able to govern Egypt and make the preparations for the famine. Here, we need to note that the son Jacob had been told was dead, was in fact alive. Furthermore, when Joseph was rescued from his life of slavery and underground imprisonment at the beginning of the 7 years of plentiful harvest, he was seated in a position second only to that of the Pharaoh. Because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. These prophetical incidents show us in sequence the death and resurrection of the Messiah that was to occur someday, and the blessing he would bring to all mankind. The Bible is telling us in advance of the period of the tribulation that will come upon this world and Israel after that, a period that will be like the 7 years of famine. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. How awful that day will be. No other will be like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob, but he will be saved out of it. The Messiah will appear once more in his glory before Israel and the world at the end of this period of tribulation. I will deal with this in more detail later. After the 7 years of abundance, a famine beyond all imagination covered the earth. Hearing the rumor that there was grain in Egypt, people from all the surrounding countries came flocking to buy food. Then one day, 10 men came and bowed down before Joseph, governor of Egypt, and asked to buy food. These were Joseph's elder brothers, whom Jacob had sent from the land of Canaan. Seeing his brothers bowing down before him, Joseph was reminded of the dreams he had had, and the words his brothers had said in reaction to these dreams. Do you intend to reign over us? In obedience to Joseph's command, his elder brothers brought their youngest brother, Benjamin, to him. Then Joseph told them he was their brother, whom they had sold into slavery. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt." Joseph explained that even though they had sold him as a slave out of jealousy, this was to provide a path for God to carry out a great act of salvation. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and all the rest of his family down to the region of Goshen in Egypt to live there. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. This lengthy story of Joseph adorns the pages of the latter part of the book of Genesis. Joseph's life of victimization and suffering brings to mind the unfair death of Abel and various other similar incidents. The glory that Joseph received later also explains various issues for us. There was Seth, the new child who was given in the place of Abel. And there was Abraham's son, Isaac, who was returned to him alive and well after Abraham had offered him as a burnt sacrifice on the altar in the land of Moriah. All these people may appear to us to have walked unfair paths at first, but they testify of the far greater promise of the resurrection that is to come later. From the passages we have read so far, we can consider how God was intending to fulfill his plan. Surely, the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. When it comes to God's plan, he never carries out anything except what he has said in his word. Everything the people in the Bible experienced and every word the prophets recorded came about only through the evidence presented. In other words, God does not just do things on a whim without any previous evidence.